Hello, Danielle, the photo philosopher here. Since every thought you think creates your future, let's think about cameras. Today I want to talk about aperture. The three big players in photography are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Okay, those are the exposure triangle, as a lot of people refer to it. Those are the three numbers and the three ideas that mean the most in making a photograph. Today we're going to concentrate on aperture. Aperture controls the amount of light that reaches the sensor. Okay? Aperture is essentially the hole in the center of your lens. How big or small that is. Okay? Not only does aperture control the amount of light that reaches the sensor, it also controls your depth of field. How much in front of and behind your focal point, subject, point of focus, is actually in focus, okay? The bigger the f-stop number, the smaller the aperture, and vice versa. The smaller the physical size of the aperture, the greater the depth of field, or the more in focus, in front and behind of your subject. When starting to learn photography, I had trouble with this idea. And group F64 helped me remember it. It's a group of photographers from the 1920s and 30s who, during a very political time and a time of the American West, wanted to form a photographic, politically conscious group that was based on a great depth of field and complete focus, which F64 in terms of large format camera was at one time the greatest depth of field that you could achieve in that complete focus from the beginning of the image to the end of the image. So I always think of group F64, and I know that the opposite of that is shallow depth of field. So one thing I want to show you, this is just kind of a picture of apertures. I literally Googled aperture and looked up images, and this came up. So feel free to do that if you need to look at it. So as you see here on this end of the spectrum, 2.8, that's very wide open, where F22 is very closed down. Shallow depth of field, very little in focus. Great depth of field. A whole lot in front and behind of your subject in focus. Now, one thing to know about aperture is it doesn't have anything to do with your camera, okay? Aperture is all in your lens. Buying a fancier camera is not going to get you a wider aperture range, but buying a fancier lens will get you a wider aperture range, okay? And there is a lot happening on this side of the spectrum that's not listed. Most of you are probably shooting with kit lenses, so you're stuck right here about 5.6, when everything under that is what's considered the creative spectrum. Now, I use 2.8 lenses a lot. That's about as wide open as you can get in a zoom lens. This is a very popular 24 to 70 2.8, okay? And if you want to know what your aperture abilities are, on the inside of your lens, it'll tell you what kind of lens you have, 24 to 70, followed by two M's, and then it'll have a 1 and a semicolon and another number. See how this says 1 semicolon 2.8? That means this can go down to a 2.8. One of my favorite lenses that for a very small fee can expand your photography greatly is what photographers we like to call the Nifty 50. It's a fixed 50 millimeter lens that goes down to 1.8 aperture, right? Which is this way. You can have very little bit in focus. For instance, I love to photograph flowers and bees. This allows me to concentrate on one particular flower and have the rest fall off. So only one is in focus and the rest kind of falls off. People who are shooting over here are generally shooting landscapes, so they want a greater depth of field. The Nifty 50 looks a lot like this. This is actually a 28 millimeter. I'm using the Nifty 50 to film this currently. But this is a 28 millimeter that goes down to 2.8 as well. You can see it right there. Okay. Now, places to pick up the Nifty 50. You can get it for between $100 and $200, depending on whether you're Canon or Nikon. B&H Photo I highly recommend, and Adorama camera as well online. But Craigslist, if you're not scared or you have someone who will go with you, I highly recommend Craigslist. You can try out the lens, put it on your camera, use it, see what kind of condition it's in, and get it for half the price sometimes. Yeah. Apertures. Especially for my Toledo peeps, retain some of this. It's going to make our abilities to cover much more ground later if you have some idea what I'm talking about. All right, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Today we talked about aperture. It's either known as aperture or f-stop. Until next time.